Hello and welcome to the day ahead. It is Thursday, June the 11th. I'm Andrew Gagan. Well, the local market is expected to fall at the open with ASX futures down around 0.75%. Global investor sentiment turned negative overnight on an escalation of hostilities between the US and Iran, with oil rising and gold plunging. US forces have launched fresh attacks on Iran after President Trump warned that the country would be hit hard if no peace deal is secured. Investors on Wall Street also considered the latest US inflation data, which showed price growth accelerated. The chip makers led the losses, with the semiconductors index down more than 3.5%. Nvidia and Broadcom were among the biggest drags on the S&P 500, with investors worried about stretched valuations. After the closing bell, Oracle reported quarterly capital expenditures that were higher than estimates, raising investor concerns about the profitability of the company's AI infrastructure business. Supermicro Computer tumbled after announced plans to raise $7 billion through a series of equity and equity-linked financing transactions to fund component purchases for its AI server demand. Qualcomm was caught up in the sell-off. Shares of trucking companies, JB Hunt, Old Dominion, fell after Amazon announced expansions of its less-than-truckload freight services in the US. The energy majors tracked the price of crude higher, while the top gold miners followed the price of bullion lower. Well, the US military has begun strikes against multiple targets in Iran, according to US Central Command, for what it calls unwarranted and continued aggression. This comes after President Trump warned the US forces would strike at Iran again if no peace deal is secured, saying, "We're going to be attacking them very hard." Well, overnight, the US military targeted air defense and radar sites around the Strait of Hormuz after a US attack helicopter was down near the strategic waterway. Iran responded with missile and drone attacks on US bases in Jordan, Kuwait, and Bahrain, with reports of little significant damage. Now, on the data front, in the US, consumer inflation increased 4.2% in the 12 months through to May, its fastest pace in 3 years, boosted by surging energy prices fueled by the Middle East conflict. Excluding the volatile food and energy components, core CPI increased 2.9% year on year. Petrol prices accelerated 7% over the month to be up 40% from a year ago. US Treasury yields were mixed following the data and the escalation of tensions in the Middle East. The US 2-year was at 4.13%, while the 10-year yield rose to 4.55. Australian 3-year government bond yields slipped to 4.5%, and the 10-year was at 4.91. The US dollar index up slightly. The Aussie dollar has fallen back to 69.9 US cents. Well, oil prices surged after President Trump threatened an attack on Iran, although prices paired gains after the president said the US military had escorted ships carrying more than 100 million barrels of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. Well, Brent crude futures are up close to 4% at near $95 a barrel. Gold has fallen more than 4% on renewed fears about an escalation in the Middle East conflict and rising inflation. Spot gold at around $4,070 an ounce. Copper futures fell 1.5%. Iron ore was up to 103 US a tonne, and Bitcoin is currently trading just over 61,000 US dollars. Well, ahead locally today, we get June consumer inflation expectations. They'll be released. And on the corporate calendar, Light & Wonder is due to hold its AGM, while Super Retail Group holds an investor briefing. That is your day ahead. We'll see you again tomorrow.